I want to go through an idea real quick about how to tune by ear. Now typically I will use a tuner. This is a headstock tuner that I would generally have clipped on to the top of my guitar, and it would tell me if I'm flat or sharp, and I could adjust the tuning machines as need be. But sometimes you don't have a tuner, so how do you know if you are in tune? The way that I first started to figure out how to tune by ear was by picking notes or picking notes from a song that I'm familiar with. Whenever I go through all of these strings right here, all of these strings are separated in an interval known as a fourth, with exception to the G and B, which I'll get to in a second. But what I wanted to find was a song where the first two notes were something I could recognize and were a fourth apart. And so what that song became for me was Here Comes the Bride, as in. So now whenever I go across these strings and I play them, I'll pluck them in succession, the E and then the A, and I'll think, do those sound like the first two notes to Here Comes the Bride? Yep, sounds like it, so that must be in tune. If the A is a little bit flat, no, that doesn't sound like it, so I'd know that I need to raise it up until it sounds like the first two notes of. Alright, so you can do that across all of these strings. Or not all of them, but most of them. The one exception is the G and the B string. These are separated by an interval known as a third, which is different from a fourth, so I had to find a different song that sounds like whenever I was first learning how to tune by ear. And what I landed on was Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, as in. So whenever I pluck the G and the B string, what I'm listening for is, does this sound like the first two notes of what I know to be and recognize to be Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas? And yes, it does. If it was a little bit sharp, no, that's not a very Merry Christmas. So yeah, that's how I got in the habit of figuring out how to tune by ear. Another thing to keep in mind about how to tune by ear is that all of these strings, when plucked together, like when plucked in pairs, all of these strings when plucked in pairs, like those, or those, or those, like the ones that are in direct succession with one another, they're forming a chord in and of themselves, like this E and A. That is forming an A5, like you're basically playing an A. You're just not used to hearing an A, like it's this chord. You're just not used to hearing it with the E in the bass, but it's still the same separation of notes. It's still an A chord. And so you should be able to hear, sonically, you should be able to understand that that is a chord, and you should be able to hear if it's not in tune, like it sounds like this. That doesn't sound right. You would need to figure out which string is maybe flat or sharp, raising it until it becomes a chord, and you can hear that click, that mesh that kind of begins to happen between those chords. These two notes right here, that would be a G. So anyway, they're all basically a chord that you're making whenever you pluck them together. One of them just an outright major chord, a G. Alright, so hopefully that will give you an approach on how to begin learning how to tune by ear.